Okay, well, welcome and thank you all for being here. My name is Clark Buckner. I'm the director here at Telematic Media Arts, where we're pleased to present an In Conversation with artist Laneya Billingsley. I'm sorry to say that our scheduled interlocutor, Shiloh Hamilton, has contracted COVID and is not going to be here today. I'm sorry. I know that she was a draw for many of you, and I beg your patience. I have spent a lot of time with the installation and working with Laneya on this piece, and I'm going to do my best to fill in the meantime. For sure. Hi, Bob. So Laneya Billingsley, who some of you might know as Billie Ocean, is an experimental filmmaker and videographer whose work traverses the wet layers of our internal landscapes and fixates on our need for, journey towards healing our hearts and internal environments. Her work transmutes the spiritual, emotional into a visual, sensory experience. Yeah, that's a nice introduction to this piece in particular. Yeah. So, welcome. Luckily, the audience today has had a chance to take in the work. But would you, could we start just with an introduction to the piece, like just to be close to you? What were some of the ideas and motivations that first led you to creating this work?
A lot of my work builds on itself, thematically, but most of it, the root is, different ways to approach healing, for a very plain term, right? But then, as of late, I've just been in these environments, or not even in these environments, experiences with people, myself, where, you kind of have your past traumas and things, right? Your past experiences, and you allow that to be, you allow those narratives to, not always, but to become excuses for, say, acting the way you're acting, or putting yourselves in certain situations, right? And you're like, well, I can't help it because this is just the way I am, And I've been, especially when it comes to love, I've been even in relationships with people where they just couldn't escape themselves, but comfortably so, right? So it's this need to be close to, not even a need, but it's comfortability, learning how to break that comfortability and break cycles, even if it's something you're so used to. And this piece drastically so, which is funny, it's on this scene, I'm cutting my head off. It's a drastic interpretation of just enough's enough. It's time to just cut off all the weight and all the things that you've allowed to control, all the things you've allowed to essentially just control your behaviors and control, just take over basically. So, yeah, it's basically just how to become exalted. You have to kill yourself to be born again,
I want to delve further into those themes, but maybe first wanted to ask you about some of the formal features of the installation. In some ways, there's a real play with genre in the work, right?
Yes.
And that it's introduced as a video game, but in many respects it reads like a fairy tale or like an epic. Yes. Yeah. It's got elements of horror, sort of a gothic horror. It's got elements of a music video.
Yeah.
How do you think about genre, and was that intentional, kind of layering play?
Well, it's very 90s, I feel like. I'm a 90s baby, and gothic and horror and music videos are just so, I don't know, it's just engraved in my soul. So I express in a lot of these similar themes, but also I use this video game thing to I always try to find ways to tackle more hard subjects, right? And video games are always like, oh, it's a video game, it's fun, it's like easily to, you can just turn it on and like start playing it. And so I wanted to paint this like, this interpretation or a piece that showed that, you can, it's very similar, right? Like you just want to like, you just turn it on and you just try to navigate this internal space, but making it feel less complex, right? So I try to have an easy approach by way of a video game, but also it's not an easy battle, right? So then I have these kind of extreme tie-ins, like say a horror movie or something, but then it's kind of like cheesy, not cheesy, but kind of like on the nose in a way, so it is presented in this kind of gothic horror way, like even the image just feels very like gothic horror, but I don't know, maybe more sci-fi looking at it. But yeah, I just like to tie in all these different tropes that I was raised around in a way to make this journey feel a bit more accessible. Yeah.
I want to ask also about, well, essentially like the art direction and the costuming, which is really the core of it.
Yeah.
And I know, or I think that I overheard you explain to somebody that, the costumes come out of just your wardrobe. Am I wrong about that?
Yes.
But on the other hand, there is a really like a developed aesthetic here, yes? And I mean, I don't think the Huntress's costume is in your wardrobe, or is it? I mean, to say like...
It's all mine.
Is that right?
I mean, it's things that I'm obviously embellishing a bit. Like, I'm not walking around like a chain over my chest, like at Whole Foods, but... but still, I'll just randomly be like, I feel like I need this chain for something, and then I'll go buy a chain. Of course, I did actually, I specifically bought that huge black rock for this video, because I'm like, the whole point of this video is finding the key to unlock your heart that releases the chain, that's weight, So I'll embellish a little bit. Most of it, it's just my wardrobe. But I think just from so many years of making pieces that are kind of showing different interpretations of like a similar goal, my wardrobe just kind of naturally, just went towards that.
You develop resources.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so then the costumes, which are some ways sort of a key component to the presentation of the characters, right? It's developing sort of intuitively, just trying things on, thinking, or you sketch them out. You have an idea about what you want beforehand.
Well, speaking of which, this mushroom situation, I got that hat at a thrift store in Sacramento. And when I got it, I was like, oh, this looks like a mushroom, which maybe I could use that for something. And then when I was doing writing storyboarding for this piece, I was like, oh, I want a mushroom character. And I already have this mushroom hat. So it just kind of works out. There's just certain things I'll be like, I feel like I need that, right? Like when I saw this Dune, funeral dress, I was like, oh, I need that too. Don't know why, but I need it. And then, but it always ends up working out in these very specific ways, which is interesting.
Yeah. So maybe that's the idea developing, in fact.
Yeah.
Like you were already picking out the dress before you knew that you were going to be making the video.
Exactly. I was like, oh, I'm going to use that for something. I don't know what yet. And then obviously there's moments too where I'm like, okay, I'm making this piece. How can I make this fit? But for the most part, it's like, I don't know. It's kind of a bit of both. But normally I'm just kind of intuiting something that I need. Something like even this dress here. I got that when I was still living in, I think Texas. I got that when I was in Texas. And I was like, one day I'm going to play a milkmaid of sorts, And then here we are. So,
yeah. You're ready for it.
I'm ready for it.
What about, you mentioned the influence of music videos, but can you say more about music and its role in your creative process? Or do you have, in a way, the collection of songs carries us through the stories, right? So are you working back from a song, or are you finding music to fit the images?
Interesting question. I don't even know. I feel like I knew I wanted to have Prince playing for some reason. I need Prince, and then I had a Prince, cassette tape. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have Prince playing. I'm gonna plug the Prince tape opened, and then everything else has just been I have well, your actual question is yes, music is kind of the how do you say, like the guiding force, you know, like kind of just like leads you through like the different emotional landscapes. And a lot of the songs I choose lyrically will be on the theme with the film as well. You know, like this song is Damn You by Prince, and it's like talking about love, but also you can relate it to like, you can twist the meaning a lot of ways, right? And so I kind of have the context leaning towards myself and the situation at play. But yeah, I definitely, music is very important because outside of my video pieces, I make different like soundscapes and I don't know, I like just using music as a way to teleport beyond the image itself. So it's probably just as important.
It's so interesting. Teleport in the sense of expand, somehow sort of expand the experience beyond.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's immediately evident.
And it does hit really different because I edit everything first and then I do the music second, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a very different experience just having the piece just played with like the natural sounds of me, you know, kind of crunching on things. But the music's very important.
Yes, I bet. Or even here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I just want like a very visceral experience, right? Like they have this like crazy imagery, and then the music just makes it almost like you're in a chokehold of sorts, you know? Like the way Damn You comes on like so unnecessarily loud. It's just, I don't know, I just love just having this kind of like emotional attack, you know? Because that's how it feels in general, at least for me, so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Fills the sound and immerses the viewer.
But also to match like the kind of emotional, like the ebbs and flows of our own emotional states, like just going throughout the day or like having an experience with a lover or a friend or a person or just in your room by yourself, you know, just like going through these different realms and you're like, what the fuck, you know? So I always try to like, you know, imitate or I don't know, translate that, but for in this video space to the best of my ability, but yeah.
Maybe in a similar vein, talking about sort of the effect of the music in the space, I wanted to ask about your approach to this as a video installation and the three walls and that sort of three-dimensional experience, right? In many ways, it's very cinematic, but in some specific ways, you play with that, situate the viewer in the space in a unique way, and maybe this is too many questions at the same time, but or let's start there. Let me start there. I'll follow up with my
say that again, sorry.
Well, just like how it is that you composed it, thinking about it as an installation, right? Mm-hmm. In some ways, there's a cinematic quality to it because it tells a story, yes? Mm-hmm. But in other ways, especially as I spend time with it as a loop, yes? Yeah. And it's almost structured like a loop. This is getting into the nitty-gritty, but like at the end, there's sort of a sense of this relief or sort of this relinquishing of a former self, and then it comes back to the beginning, and we're looking at an array of possible new selves, right?
Exactly.
So that there's a way in which it's like, oh, we're kind of at the end, but the end brings us back to the beginning, and so even though it follows a narrative arc, it plays in this loop, and what to say, at a certain point is operating more like a bunch of different images that are playing off each other, all at the same time rather than just...
Yeah. Well, to the first part, I feel like this piece is probably my most cinematic piece, I'd say. My other pieces in the past, I had maybe my film before this was going in this direction, but this one does feel a bit more like, you know, cinematic to me, especially presented this way. But typically in my films, I have the installation in some way, shape, or form embodying some sort of like a capsule to walk into where you can just like feel, you know, this immense dose of whatever I'm trying to like put out from the video. And then you and I talked about ways we can like activate this space, and you were like, yeah, let's do a 3-channel like, you know, projector situation. I was like, hell yeah, because then people could just sit right here. And it's this like cinematic film, but you're also kind of engulfed in it. And more I've been trying to create these, think of different ways I can have people feel like they're actually inside of the video beyond just say doing VR or something, right? And so this was like the perfect opportunity to do that. And I was trying to kind of even have myself be a bit more life-size, so there's moments where it looks like you're just like looking right at me, you know? But, oh wait, I forgot. What was the second part you said? I wanted to speak to that. You said,
so we're talking about the looping.
oh, the looping. That was a good point to bring up. So the looping is essentially another part of the messaging. It's like, once you heal one part, but there's this whole other like load of shit that comes up right when you like have to start all over again. And also healing isn't just like, oh, I'm healed. It's like this kind of like continuous thing where even if you think you're over something, that could come up again. You're like, you know, like I thought I processed that. Or it's like you can, you know, move through one thing, but now, you know, you're over. It's just like an endless process. And each time the goal is to get better and better, right? But I always want my videos to feel like the ending to feel kind of like blissful, but it's not necessarily like a happy ending because it's like, okay, now I made it here, but now we got this whole other part to tackle, and then this other part, and this other part. I mean, that's life, right? You're just kind of over, like endlessly kind of navigating yourself and all these triggers and things that come up. So I do want my pieces to always feel at the end like it could just be looped because I am imitating lightly.
Yeah, and that is an internal, less a story, but almost like a dynamic.
Yeah, it's like internal battle, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the immersive quality of the installation, I'm interested in your use of the forest, right? For me, that's a really rich quality of it. These images being surrounded with the trees and the green leaves and so forth. How did you find the forest? I mean,
that's what it feels like, right? Just like being in the thick of it, just like in yourself. It's just like all these little pieces that are kind of like hidden or like, you know, it's not, the forest is just a way to kind of represent how you really do have to like do some searching and finding and you get lost, you know, and then you can find something and you lose it again. Or like you're in the forest and this like person with an axe is running at you, right? And I feel like that's how it feels sometimes where you're like, I was not thinking about processing this today, you know? So I thought the forest is really important for this piece since it is so deeply about, or a more cinematic way to portray like searching or finding, like compared to my last pieces, which are very heavily more gloopy and abstracted. So, which is portraying a similar thing, but I was like, okay, what's the more like real world version of this, a forest, obviously. Yeah.
you know, it's interesting to hear you talk about the searching. For me, I was struck by, there's almost a sense of the forest as an interiority. I mean, maybe sort of getting back to that, the psychological dynamics that you articulated before, you know, that the forest also is like into the mind, you know, down the rabbit hole.
Oh yeah. Yeah, just like a very shrubbery internal landscape. And then there's the moment here with the mushrooms, which I'm curious how that reads, but that's supposed to be, so it's like very like, what is this Gwen Stefani music video moment that's happening right now? And she's like, the you and me lyric, you know, and the song is actually about breakups, right? But if you use it in this context where I'm cutting my head off, I'm like breaking up with that version or ending that relationship with that self, you know? And then the mushrooms here, this is where I'm reborn, right? The mushrooms right before that, I'm like healing the ground, kind of like nourishing the ground so that way this other form, you know, can like exist again. So yeah, I don't know, the forest was very necessary, even the fact that, you know, like in the forest you find mushrooms, right? So I really wanted to find this element or this like realm that perfectly portrayed like the internal space and how it's not an easy, you know, thing to navigate. Or it's just like, I don't know, to me a forest is always a place where you get lost for like a second or for a while before you find your way again. So,
Departure.
yeah, I thought it was like the perfect environment to use.
How about the goats?
I really just wanted to film some goats, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I was like, I'm in this outfit, like I have to be by some goats, like I don't know. But well, the goats just also, so in my previous work, or like I'll make some photo edits and I'll kind of have like goat things going on. But when you look up goat, it's actually a symbol for rebirth and innocence and searching. And I'm like, okay, I need goats for this film because that's literally what all this is about. And I just DM'd this girl who had goats, and I went up to her farm in Sebastopol, and I was just spent the whole day with goats. And I was just gonna have the goats be like a blip of a moment, but yeah, I don't know, it ended up being like a 4-minute section of the video.
Yeah. The goats are not unlike the forest, right? That sitting in the installation, you get this immersion in the forest, but you also have this very visceral experience of these goats, you know what I mean?
But they're like
You're really close with them.
Oh, they're so cute.
For me too, they are anticipate the beheading at the end. They're like sacrificial.
They do, and they're also kind of like it's kind of like a goat sandwich if you really think about it.
Goat sandwich.
Because you have the goats at the beginning, and then right after I get my head cut off, you see the goats again. And the goats are just very soothing, and I feel like in this they're kind of like, it's okay, you know, like they're, first of all, I didn't even know goats like kiss, like they're like acting like dogs. You know, it was so cute, and so it just felt like this kind of like spirit guide in some sorts, like almost like they're cheerleaders. And that's what they ended up becoming in the film. So I was like, okay, I have to put them at the end again. So I had head cut off goats and then mushrooms, and I'm like back to life.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and the goats, your head comes off the goats.
I know. Someone was like, I was like searching for I had like an axe in my story, and I was like searching for goats on Instagram, and someone was like, "Are you about to chop some goat heads off?" And I'm like, "No, just mine, you know, it's fine."
Yeah, yeah, exactly. You become the goat.
Yeah.
In a way, you've been unpacking it already, but in terms of the themes, yes, might talk about the subject of the work in terms of self-realization, yes. And I think there's a really interesting take, though, that a lot of the language around self-realization these days is emphatically affirmative, yes. And there's an interesting or sort of maybe unexpected connection to mourning and to loss, yes. And it's funny because in many ways, again, it's richly sensuous, playful, full of joy, but ultimately, yeah, again, themes of sacrifice, mourning, loss. Can you say more about that?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, as we kind of already talked about a little bit, just mourning the loss of the self, previous self, so that way you can get to this. And again, it can be very uncomfortable to have to do that, right? To like move on to this, like release all these things you become so used to, even if it's things or qualities that have kept you really stagnant, you know, or caused you a lot of pain. And then there's also the layer of through this, I think before, like the progression of my films have been a lot about like healing and different ways to look at that, different ways to portray that. And at where I'm at now, it's also like it's beyond just what you can do for yourself or what you know, obviously it's with, you can have conversations with friends and all these different things, right? But you also have to think about people that have like passed on as well. And that is a pretty important part subtly in this too, about mourning the loss of family members and people, family members you've met and haven't met, but just understanding that, you know, healing does do a lot for not only yourself, but your broader family, people that have passed away. Like you can just clear a lot of trauma through and through, right? And so I was just trying to navigate different ways to portray that in this film. And so yeah, I definitely have to tackle like loss and mourning. And there's like one scene where I'm like talking to my ancestors. It's pretty quick, I guess, but I blow that what do you call the flower you?
Dandelion?
Oh yeah, is that a dandelion? okay, the dandelion. But that's like an interpretation of like me speaking to my ancestors and them being like, oh yeah, I've been here the whole time, just kind of watching you fumble around, right? Like get your shit together, basically. But it's saying that, but in this kind of sweet way where it's like you've been here. So it's finding ways to look beyond yourself in order to heal yourself and get to where you're trying to go, and just be really aware of the energies around you. You know, whether that's people that are here, or people who you can't see, like your family members. So yeah, it's a very spiritual portrayal of self-healing as well, looking beyond yourself to get to where you're trying to go.
Yeah, I think that's a striking feature of it too, that this idea of self-realization, but in a way, it's not egotism in that way, right? The self is really portrayed as relationship.
Yeah, and you are here because of all these prior relationships and dynamics and people who, aren't here anymore.
Yeah.
So you do have to really become aware of that. Even if it's people who have like hurt you, or just it's just like there's so many histories that have to be cleared and worked through and looked at, and that's a major part of healing. So
Who's the figure of the gray-haired with the dark dress? Or figure who? There's the huntress, yes?
Oh.
There's a central character, there's the huntress. And
Right.
I say that because, for me, that character has a connection to those ancestral figures.
Exactly. So I was like, gray hair, but I have a gray scarf on.
Yeah, sorry.
I was like, did I get a gray wig?
Yeah.
Yes, it represents my ancestors, it represents death, it represents your guides leading you to the place where you die, so that way you can be reborn again. Basically, like the person that once you realize they're there, that's the person that can actually help you and assist you, right? And so that's why they're kind of like in the shadows, because they're hard to see and you haven't really been paying attention to them, but they've been there the whole time. So yes, spirit guides and essentially the ones that can lead you towards.
Yeah, that's interesting. But like the huntress, they're ambivalent because it's a little bit scary, right? They're a little bit ghostly, or has that feel.
Well, that's how. Yeah, I wanted to portray it in this kind of like horror movie way because in horror movies you're being so like, who is it? Michael Myers, who follows you like super slow, but he always kills you somehow. Like he's like in your room after you fully passed him up hours ago. But I wanted this kind of like ominous feeling of these characters, lurking around, lurking around trying to kill you, but in this context, trying to kill you for your benefit, not to your demise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just in terms of sort of synthesizing these different dimensions, it's striking because these are both these characters and different characters in a story, and there are others who are evoked, but at the same time, for me anyway, and I don't know if you meant to do this, like maybe that's the question, that because you play all the characters, that in a way, again, sort of the forest and the sense of it being an internal landscape, that both like the self is a relationship to others, but also that we have these different sort of aspects of the psyche and these, these other people who kind of occupy permanent, are kind of always with us and that we're always in dialogue with. I mean, is that consistent with your sense of the piece?
I feel like all my pieces, I'm every single character because at the end of the day, I am trying to portray self-healing from this lens of, initially all my pieces were kind of their own, like, therapeutic projects, like figuring out how to, like, handle whatever was going on. And it started back when I was in animation at CCA. I was kind of doing animated pieces similar to this context. And then I switched to video, but yeah, I'm just like, okay, how can I represent this part of myself and that part of myself and that part of myself? And in the end, I'm just, cast throughout. But I feel like it still shows it's still a portrayal that many people can like relate to, because it's just showing that within oneself there are so many, like there's so many different parts of you that are all working together in these different ways. But I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, it does answer the question. And I think that's, it's interesting to hear you describe it in that way, because then sort of this work, this healing, the narrative of self-realization in the video, they get tied to your art practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
And do you approach the artwork itself as a healing practice? And in some ways, it occurred to me when you described that, is that it's a matter of the installation then makes a space for the audience to similarly sort of suspend their everyday involvements and go on this internal journey and ideally, do some of this work on their own terms.
Yeah, I mean, that's the goal, is to create pieces that, at least installations, where when they come into it, even if they're like, what the hell did I just watch, or why? But then there are a lot of people who are like, I don't know why, but it feels like I just went to some like really like acid drip therapy session. And I was like, okay, cool. Like that's like the goal, is for people to, even if at first they're not even exactly sure why, they feel something visceral from it, or they come away with a sense of like, damn, okay, this is feeling like some internal things are a bit more accessible than before, even if just for that moment.
Yes.
So that's always my goal. But I mean, like a lot of artists, you're kind of just like making pieces that, like I'm never like, oh, I'm gonna make this healing piece, I'm just trying to like, I feel like most artists are just processing emotions when they're making pieces, right? In whatever art form you approach art with. And since that's what I'm working through, all of my pieces are typically about similar things, right? Because that's what I'm like processing. Even if I'm just doing, like sometimes I'll make like images like that. Like even this piece itself is about, like that's me on a deathbed and my new self is coming out, like it looks like I'm giving birth to myself, but there's no head, similar to the theme of this, So, yeah.
Yeah, that's the loop again.
The cycle, yeah, like,
Well, maybe that's a good place to pause and open the floor to
some questions.
So, kind of going off the fact that you're like playing all of your own characters,
Mm-hmm.
and you talked a little bit already about the representations those kind of bring up for you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious about your experience in that process of embodying these reflections, characters,
Mm-hmm.
and to get them into like the creation of this film.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe if you could talk about like just that experience of moving through these characters, like before, during, after, and how that's felt.
Like emotionally, kind of.
Yeah.
I'd say probably playing the Huntress character is probably the most intense feeling. First of all, I shot those scenes at the Rose Garden in Oakland, which is like the most cutesy neighborhood, and there's like families and like people taking graduation photos, and I'm running around with an axe. And you get a lot of people being like, people trying to suss you out, so they're being extra nice, like, hey, like, how's it going, So there's a lot of that, and I'm just like, hey, or like have the axe behind my back, like, super chill, okay. But just embodying, because the whole time I'm like running around with this axe, and beyond like the, Piedmont environment, it just felt pretty intense still. Like on paper, I was like, oh yeah, I'll just like have a scene where I chop my head off. But then actually acting that out felt really intense and kind of weirdly sad in this way, and very like dark too, which it should feel. But yeah, I don't know. Sometimes, when I'm on set, I'm just in these modes where I'm like looking at my storyboards. I'm like, okay, I have to do these characters, I have to do this characters, and I have like a constricted amount of time. So I'm like just going through it like really, really quick. And typically it's when I'm editing it where I'll be like, damn, you know. But there are certain characters that will stand out, like Huntress, where I'm like, oh yeah, this is kind of intense. Like, I don't know how this is going to be received, or if I even needed to go this hand, but sure. But yeah, that's a good question. I'd say typically I'm just moving through it really quickly, but then there'll be a standout moment where I'm like, okay, you know. So.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Don't be shy.
I had a follow-up. We've been talking about it largely in psychological terms. Your reference to this is visceral process, or these questions about embodying these characters.
Mm-hmm.
It seems to me like there is a focus on this as an embodied experience, both for the viewer, the immersion in the installation, and then these just, sometimes just enormous images of your body on the screen.
Yeah.
Is the body central to the work and to your thinking about?
Definitely. I mean, when I was first making videos, the body was kind of the main part of the piece, especially skin. I was like really obsessed with shooting skin, like hyper up close to where it looked abstracted. I was also working through like blackness in these like healing spaces, and how typically in Black families, like there's no one's asking like how you're feeling. Like there's no like space given to like heal yourself or even like have these conversations, because everyone's just kind of like trying to get shit done. And I grew up in a household of 5 people, and I'm the oldest. So I'm just in that environment with my mom. I was kind of like the second mom, where I was just constantly working and helping her out and like trying to like keep balance in the house. But there's never like the balance of like the mind ever, which I'm sure a lot of us have experienced that. But it wasn't really until I got to art school where I was like, okay, yeah, maybe I can kind of like break that down a bit more and navigate that. And so for some reason, I translated that into like skin, right? And just having these very like textural video pieces that portrayed similar emotions, but by way of being like very like working through portraying an emotion, but by making it the most abstract I can make it. And so it kind of shows up in here, but just by way of a shot being like really close up. But yeah, I used to only have skin video pieces. I'm trying to say that.
That's, again, the goats do that to me. In other words, they're very there as these living bodies.
Yeah.
You can almost smell them.
Mm-hmm. And it's just this way of being like I'm here, like I'm just like very present and allowing you to like feel that through the screen, I'm always trying to figure out different ways you can feel something just like through the screen.
Feel something through the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just like get right up in your face.
Yeah. In the composition, on the editing floor, all
the
that.
Editing, the sounds, eventually maybe incorporate smell some type of way and like textures. But just a more practical way to, and again, I love like, and I might do this some point, like VR, like try that out. Or I made during COVID this like a video, or what do you call it, a computer gallery space. Everyone's doing that, like the computer galleries. And I had a space like that. I think that's my first like try at doing this-ish in like a digital space. But I do really love like practical things, and so I'm always trying to figure out ways I can like create an actual space for people to come into, and it has the same effect as if it were VR or something, So obviously everyone's doing that, which is good.
What about the difference between, you have a practice as you make music videos sometimes, yes?
Yes.
As essentially as a commercial career.
Mm-hmm.
How is it different making your own work versus being able to, are you able to translate your own concerns into those too, and similarly engaged with feeling, or?
Typically, if you're working with an artist, you can have your input, but it depends. If I'm booked to like shoot it and direct it, or if I'm booked to say just edit it or something, right? Typically, luckily, I do get booked by people who want me to create something similar for them, so that's nice, where they're just kind of like, go crazy, do whatever you want, I'm fine with that, and maybe they'll have like some slight adjustments. Or people who are also trying to convey something that feels, for the internet, just very like rich and like emotionally driven, or just something that feels kind of like sticky, you know? But typically I have to follow a lot of what the artist wants, right? So in my pieces, this is where I can really like flex my, you know, weird brain muscle and go ham. Which honestly feels the best for me. Like I love doing music videos, but I think I feel the most like good when I'm just making pieces like this.
Yeah. When you can,
And I mean, obviously, it feels more therapeutic than, for the most part, than doing music videos. But I love music videos too; those are great. It's just it's a different like brain. It's a different process completely.
yes, you can really get into your own concerns for your own reasons.
Yeah. But ideally, yeah, I would love to work with someone or more people who are like, oh yeah, like, you know, do whatever you want.
We want your style.
Yeah.
We want your aesthetic.
Steve's.
Yeah. I'm sure that's the case already. From what I've seen, that's already the case.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you don't mind, it's my presumptions, but I was struck at how kind of intuitive and synthetic your artistic process was, and if there are like parallels between that and the process of therapy, like so the techniques, the journey in the video kind of refers outward to the artistic process. Like, are there analogies, the healing process and the artistic process, something like that?
Analogies between the artistic process and the healing process?
Finding a bunch of weird objects and then putting them together and finding meaning between them. That's
Yeah.
sort of
Yeah, I think most of my pieces I'm trying to find ways to tackle these, combine like art and healing to make it feel more accessible, because sometimes it can just feel so daunting, and so that's why I even went with the video game approach at the intro, where, you know, using this like this mode that feels very accessible, right, in order to approach tackling whatever you need to tackle inside. And in that, that's my form of therapy of sorts, or a way to like get to point A to B, right? Like finding different ways to balance the two. Because I feel like there's a lot of separation, and it can just feel very daunting when it comes to tackling these things. So, yeah.
trying on different characters, trying different outfits.
Yeah, different characters, different outfits. Just making it feel more like an adventure, basically. Because it is at the end of the day, right? Like this whole, even if it's like nasty or murky, it's like you're trying on different outfits every day, you're like meeting new people every day, you're finding new objects every single day. And obviously in real life it's a bit less like this, but this is one interpretation of it, of just like the everyday life, you know. And even just like, you know, I'm walking around with headphones on the whole video, for most of the video.
Yeah.
Also this kind of like dissociative, just like going through the steps of like the day-to-day trying to get to where you need to go in order to reach the point of cutting your head off. So, yeah.
Well, that seems like a good place to stop. So thank you all for being here, and thank you, Laneya, for
Thank you very much.